The following presentation will be on ethical and legal issues within sport. I'll be discussing different scenarios where particular legal issues may crop up, the importance of ethical and legal issues, as well as the implications of not working ethically. BASIS is the governing body that produces the Code of Conduct for Sport and Exercise Sciences research. The code acts as a guideline for researchers to use so they won't act unethically. One of the main issues that BASIS covers is ethical clearance. It is key when you're executing research you work professionally and legally. Gaining ethical clearance is something you must do before any research is conducted from a suitable person. For example, in my sports science class, I'd have to gain ethical clearance from a teacher before doing any form of research. A committee will review my inquiry and decide whether your proposal is safe and ethical. If they grant your permission, you'll be able to undertake your research. Another issue I'm going to discuss is the safety of the participants. When doing any form of research that includes participants, the safety is the priority. As a researcher, it is essential that you maintain strict standards so that the participants don't become endangered. In addition, all participants are to be treated the same and with respect. For example, if I were to conduct research using adults aged 70 plus, I wouldn't have them do any high impact exercises as injury is likely. In this slide, I'll discuss the importance of ethical and legal issues, ensuring the welfare and safety of participants and the researcher is crucial. Maintaining the safety of everyone involved in the research project can be done by following the guidelines set by BASIS. Moreover, ensuring that the researchers only work in their areas of expertise is important. It is vital that the researcher is an expert in what they are doing. If they are not, they could be putting themselves or the participants in serious danger. For example, using specialist equipment that requires training must only be used by those that have been trained to do so. Preserving and developing the reputation of the sport and exercise science is also included in the importance of ethical and legal issues. The guidelines are set for a reason and do in fact develop sport and exercise science. This means that if someone who works in this aspect of sport who undertakes research, they must maintain the high standards set by other researchers, otherwise reputation will be damaged. There are many implications to not working ethically. For example, you may be subject to a tribunal. A tribunal may consist of a BASIS committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may be a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. For example, the committee could suspend a researcher that was doing maximal training research and physically harmed a participant from carrying out future research in this field until they take further training. If you do not work within the ethical and legal guidelines, you could receive legal or civil action. If a participant involved in this research feels they have been treated outside the guidelines, then they would be able to take the research to court and demand a legal response to your actions. For example, if in a research project exploring the effects of vocal motivation on young children in basketball and the researcher steps out of the line of what is ethical, the child and her parents or carer could take the research to court to earn what they feel is deserved. If you are found to be not working ethically or within the guidelines set, then there is a chance measures will be put in place to refrain you from doing any further research. BASIS officers will review your situation. You may be subject to a tribunal where your actions will be discussed and decide whether what you did was unethical or illegal. If so, significant measures can be put into place to permanently suspend you from doing any further research. For this to happen, you would have had to been very unfair and abusive to your participants, possibly using physical abuse. In the next sections, I will discuss various scenarios. The first scenario, a study of attitudes to obesity in primary school children during physical education lessons. A possible scenario could be that a researcher is exploring how obese students react when doing athletics activities. For example, the researcher may analyse 3 obese students and 3 healthy students and how they act during a long-distance run. The researcher must ensure that the data is protected and kept confidential by giving the participants indirect references instead of their names as it would be unacceptable for someone to get hold of the results, and as a result could cause psychological harm. If this happens, then measures to stop their future research may arise. Possible scenarios that the researcher may face a tribunal. The tribunal may consist of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation, depending on how serious it is. This may be warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Also, the researcher must ensure that they are qualified to do this type of work with children. For example, a CRB check from the police could do this. This check would let the school become aware that the researcher has no inappropriate history of working with children. This way the school can have confidence in the researcher. Without this safety of participants, they could be at risk. The researcher could be subject to illegal or civil action. Those included would be able to take the researcher to court and demand a legal response to their actions. This could lead to temporary or permanent suspension from doing any further research. In addition, the researcher would need to gain ethical clearance from an appropriate body before any research was conducted. As the research involves children undertaking strenuous activity, it's important that this is ethical and won't cause any harm to the participants. It is dangerous for children to work too hard for too long. If the researcher didn't receive any ethical clearance but continues with the research, then they could face a tribunal as a result. If this happens, a basis committee will decide how to treat the situation, again depending on how serious it is. This may be a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Another possible issue with this scenario could be that the researcher doesn't receive informed consent from the participants but continues with the research. Without informed consent from the participants won't know the details of any potential risks. This is a serious issue, and if the researcher is caught, they could be subject to measures to stop them from doing any further research. They're not working within the guidelines. They may be called before a tribunal group of bases officers and with the chair of bases, who will review the case and decide what punishment is necessary. This could be temporary suspension or permanent expulsion from bases. Scenario 2. An investigation of the role of cold vests in aiding recovery from maximal sprint intervals. A possible scenario could be that the researcher has 8 students execute sprint intervals for 12 minutes with 30 seconds of rest and 30 seconds of max effort. The researcher must ensure that they give informed consent for their participants so that they can discuss that they have the right to withdraw. This is because they are carrying out maximal training and they may be physically harmed due to the intensity of the exercise. If this does not happen, the researcher could face a tribunal consisting of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation. This could lead to a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Moreover, the researcher must ensure that the data collected is protected. They can do this by storing the data so that they can ensure their research is kept safe and confidential and no one else can access it. If they did not do this, then their results can be stolen and credited by someone else. This may lead to a poor reputation for the researcher. Possible consequence of this could be that the researcher again faces a tribunal consisting of a basis committee that would decide how to treat the situation depending on its severity, leading to a warning, suspension, or permanent expulsion. In addition, the researcher would need to gain ethical clearance from an appropriate body before any research was conducted. As the research involves children undertaking strenuous physical activity, it's important that this is ethical and won't cause any harm to the participants. It is dangerous, again, for children to work too hard for too long. If the researcher didn't receive any ethical clearance but continues with the research, then they could face measures to stop them from doing any further research. By not working within the guidelines, this may be called before a tribunal of bases and officers and the chair of bases who will review the case and decide what punishment is necessary. This could lead to permanent expulsion or temporary suspension. The researcher conducting the project will need to ensure that they have gained ethical clearance before doing the research, as this project involves working students anaerobically for longer periods of time. It could be deemed unethical and potentially dangerous. Without ethical clearance, they could face a tribunal. If this happens, the basis committee will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may lead to warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Scenario 3. The effectiveness of PNF stretching in young gymnasts. A possible scenario could be that the researcher has a group of 6 gymnasts train of which 3 of them will undertake PNF stretching before training and 3 won't. The researcher must ensure that they carry out a risk assessment prior to the experiment. The risk assessment should be included within the informed consent that must be signed by a guardian of the young participant. Without informed consent, the participants won't be aware of the possible risks that the research could include. The young gymnast may be physically harmed by chance, and if this does happen, the researcher could face a tribunal. A tribunal may consist of a basis committee that would decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may lead to a warning, suspension, or permanent expulsion. The researcher must make sure they act with equality and impartiality, so that they preserve the reputation of sport and exercise research. But they do this by remaining completely unbiased, and the researchers shouldn't damage the reputation. However, if in this scenario factors such as race and gender affect the experiment, then actions such as a tribunal will take place. A tribunal consists of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may be a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. The researcher in this experiment must protect the data and keep everything confidential. They can do this by giving the participants indirect references instead of their names. That would be unacceptable for someone to get hold of the results. This is because it could cause psychological harm. If this does happen, then measures to stop future research may arise. Possible scenarios that the researcher will face a tribunal. A tribunal may consist of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. Again, possibly leading to a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Also, the researcher must ensure that they are qualified to do this type of work with children. Like mentioned before, they could get a CRB check from the police. This check would let the school become aware that the researcher has no inappropriate history with working with children, and they can have confidence within them. Without the safety of participants, they could be at risk. The researcher could be subject to legal or civil action. Those included would be able to take the researcher to court and demand legal response to their actions. This could lead to temporary or permanent expulsion, and could lead them to not doing any further research in the future. Scenario 4. The effect of interval training on blood lactate values. A possible scenario is that a researcher could have participants undertake interval training and have their blood lactate levels measured before and after executing the exercise. The researcher could have a group of 8 to 12 people doing this, aged between 18 and 25. The researcher would have to ensure that the safety of participants is the priority. For example, to take blood lactate levels, a blood sample is required. Therefore, this means that specialist equipment used should be clean and sterile to avoid infection. If a participant does become infected, the issues that can arise from that are very serious, and the researcher would be to blame. The researcher may be subject to a tribunal. A tribunal may consist of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may lead to a warning, suspension, or permanent expulsion. Due to the fact the researcher has taken blood from the participants, it would be a necessity that this comes under their area of expertise and that they are qualified to do so. If something goes wrong, then the consequences will be serious and to both the participant and the researcher. For example, the researcher may be subject to a tribunal. A tribunal may consist of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on its severity, leading to a warning, suspension, or permanent expulsion. The researcher in this experiment must protect the data and keep everything confidential. They can do this by giving the participants indirect references instead of their names, as would be unacceptable for this information to get leaked, and it could cause psychological harm. If this happens, then measures to stop their future research in the future may arise. The researcher could be subject to legal or civil action. Those included would be able to take the researcher to court and demand legal responses to their actions. This could lead to temporary or permanent expulsion. The researcher must make sure they act with equality and impartiality, so that they preserve the reputation of the sport and exercise science research. By completely remaining unbiased, the researcher shouldn't damage reputation. However, in this scenario, factors such as race and gender affect the experiment, then actions such as a tribunal will take place. A tribunal may consist of a basis committee that will decide how to treat the situation depending on how serious it is. This may lead to a warning, suspension, or permanent suspension. Thank you.